We're going to take a look at rounding right now. With rounding, there are two things that you need to know. One is you need to know you need to know place value. That way you know what's being asked if they say round to the nearest tenths position. The second thing is you need to know when to round up and when to round down. So we're going to take a look at both of those things, and then we're going to look at the quiz as well. So we'll take a look at when to round. We'll take a look at this second one here, when to round up or down. If you look at this number line, we have a 9 and a 10, and we know that right in the middle is 9.5. Let's say you were needing to round 9.2 to the nearest whole number, or the nearest ones position. What you're going to do is you're going to try to find on the number line about where that falls. And I would say that's probably, whoops, what happened there? Let's undo that. All right, let's just do it like this. 9.2, it's going to fall about right there. And so you can clearly see, if we need to round that to the nearest whole number, that's definitely closer to the 9 than it is to the 10. Let's say that we needed to round 9.7 to the nearest whole number, and 9.7 might be about right here, 9.7. And you can clearly see that that's closer to the 10, not to the 9. So the answer to this one, if you're rounding it, is going to be 9. If you're rounding this, it's going to be 10. So how can you do that without drawing out a number line? Here's what you do. You find the number that you're rounding to, and then you look at the one right next to it. If the one right next to it is 4 or less, anywhere on this side of the number line, you're going to round down. And when we say down, we don't mean round it down to an 8. We're rounding it down to that first number. If the number to the right of the number you're rounding to is 5 or more, so anything from the midway point all the way up to that next whole number, all of those numbers you're going to round up. So if we had 8.4, for instance, and we want to round to this number, we're going to look at the one right next door. If that number is 4 or less, we're going to round it down. And rounding it down, remember, means keeping this 8 the same. That's closest to 8. Remember, it's sort of in between the 8 and the 9. If we were rounding let's say 8.8, and you want to round to the nearest whole number, you look at the one next door, and that causes us to make it round it up to the 9. So it's pretty simple. The next thing is that you have to make sure you know your place value. So let's take a look at the place value situation here. Notice that all of the numbers to the left of the decimal point, they just have ones, tens, hundreds. They all end in this S. Because what that is this is one set of ones, this is 2 sets of 10, that's 3 sets of 100, and so on. When you go to the right of the decimal point, what it's doing is it's breaking a whole number into little pieces. And so the 2 right here is the tenths position. That's why there's a THS. What that means is it's 2 tenths in that position. And when you go to the hundredths position, you have 23 hundredths. When you go out to the thousandths position, you have 237 thousandths. And when you're looking at the number that we have here, what this actually means right here is that there's 2,375 ten thousandths. That's what that's talking about. So that's what decimal places are. You've got to make sure that you know that. A lot of times people will ask me, why isn't there a oneths position? Because for everything over here, it looks like it has a partner over here except for the ones. If you think about it, since decimal points are breaking a whole number into fractional parts, if you take 1 and you're trying to divide it into something with a denominator of 1, you really can't. You can't break it up. You're going to end up with once. And so we break everything into tenths because we use a base 10 number system. So anyway, memorize these place value positions. You can look at the back of your book. It has a chart similar to this, but make sure that you have that memorized. Once you have all of that knowledge behind you, then you can take on a problem like this. Let's look at number 1. And I'm going to pull a number line in here just to show where that's placed. This is 789 thousandths. So we're going to look what's in the middle on this number line. That's falling somewhere on this number line, somewhere between 780 thousandths and 790 thousandths. So that 789 thousandths is probably falling somewhere very close to this, 789 thousandths. It's very, very close. It's probably closer than that to the 790 thousandths. So can't help myself. I have to move that over. So clearly this is going to be closer to 790 thousandths. In the question, it's asking us to round to the nearest hundredths position. Here's the tenths position. Here's the hundredths position. So we have to look at the hundredths position and then look at the number that's right next door to the right of it. Remember, if that number is 5 or more, we're going to round this up. If it's 4 or less, we're going to let it stay as an 8. But because this is so close to the 790 thousandths, that number tells us to round up. So it's going to be 0.78. I'm sorry, 779. And so we're rounding that up. Sometimes people want to put a 0 here, and technically it's the same value, but they're asking us to round to the nearest hundredths. So we don't want to put that in there. We want to show that we really know what we're understanding the question. Okay, let's take a brief look at number 2 and number 3. We're rounding to the nearest tenths. Here's our tenths position. There's the number next door. If it's 5 or more, we let it go up to the next number, and it is, so 16.4. Sometimes people say if it's 5 or more, let it soar. If it's 4 or less, let it rest. If that helps you, you can memorize that. On the next one, we're rounding to the nearest thousandths position, so that's this position right here. We have to look at the one right next door. Remember, 5 or more, let it soar. You would make it go up to the next number. 4 or less, let it rest. We're going to let it rest at that 8. So in other words, we're saying that it's closer to 128 thousandths than it is to 129 thousandths. So we'll write that as 99.128, and we'll let it rest right at that. And that's rounding.